100 days. That's all it took for a long-running shadow conflict between Iran and Israel to explode into open warfare. For decades, the two nations fought indirectly: cyber attacks, assassinations, proxy militias, covert operations. But in June 2025, the rules changed. Israel launched major strikes against Iranian nuclear and military targets. Iran responded with waves of missiles and drones. Days later, the United States entered the conflict directly, striking Iranian nuclear facilities for the first time in history. What followed was a crisis that shook global markets, threatened shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, and raised fears of a wider regional war. This is the story of the first 100 days of the Iran-Israel-US war. Before June 2025, tensions had already been building. For years, Israel warned that Iran's nuclear program posed a threat to its security. Iran maintained that its nuclear activities were peaceful. At the same time, diplomatic negotiations between Washington and Tehran struggled to produce a breakthrough. In early 2025, the United States and Iran were engaged in talks regarding Iran's nuclear program, but progress stalled. Throughout the region, Iranian-backed groups and Israeli forces were already engaged in multiple flashpoints. The Middle East was increasingly unstable. Many analysts believed that a major confrontation was becoming more likely. Few expected how quickly it would arrive. On June 13, 2025, Israel launched a major military operation against Iran. The strikes targeted nuclear facilities, military sites, missile infrastructure, and senior commanders. Israeli leaders stated that the goal was to prevent Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons capability. Iran rejected those accusations and maintained that it was not pursuing nuclear weapons. The operation marked one of the most significant direct attacks ever carried out by Israel against Iranian territory. Military facilities were hit. Nuclear-related sites came under attack. Several senior Iranian military figures were reportedly killed. The Middle East immediately entered a dangerous new phase. Iran responded within hours. Missiles and drones were launched toward Israel. Iran called the retaliation Operation True Promise 3. Israeli air defenses intercepted many incoming threats, but some projectiles penetrated defenses and struck targets inside Israel. Air raid sirens sounded across Israeli cities. Residents rushed to shelters. For the first time in years, many Israelis faced sustained missile attacks directly linked to Iran itself, rather than proxy groups. The conflict had moved beyond the shadow war. This was now direct state-on-state combat. Around the world, governments called for restraint, but events continued to escalate. The next major turning point came on June 21, 2025. The United States launched strikes against key Iranian nuclear facilities. The operation targeted sites at Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. According to U.S. officials, the objective was to severely damage Iran's nuclear infrastructure. The strikes included the use of B-2 bombers and long-range missiles. This was historic. Although Washington and Tehran had confronted one another indirectly for decades, direct U.S. attacks on Iranian territory represented a major escalation. Iran condemned the strikes and warned of consequences. Around the world, governments feared the conflict might spiral into a wider regional war. Oil markets reacted immediately. Military forces across the Middle East were placed on high alert. One of the world's most important waterways suddenly became a focal point. The Strait of Hormuz carries a significant share of global oil exports. Any disruption can affect energy prices worldwide. As tensions increased, shipping companies, insurers, and governments monitored the region closely. Oil prices surged amid fears that fighting could disrupt supplies and maritime traffic. Global markets became increasingly sensitive to every military development. The possibility of a prolonged conflict created uncertainty far beyond the Middle East. Consumers, businesses, and governments everywhere felt the impact. Wars are measured not only by military operations but also by human consequences. During the conflict, civilians on multiple sides experienced fear, displacement, and uncertainty. Military personnel faced constant operational pressure. Families worried about loved ones deployed throughout the region. Reports described wounded service members, heightened military readiness, and continuing concerns about escalation. Even after periods of reduced fighting, Troops remained on alert and prepared for renewed conflict. The longer the crisis continued, the greater the concern that a broader regional war could emerge. Eventually, diplomatic efforts produced a fragile ceasefire. But a ceasefire did not mean peace. Skirmishes continued. Threats continued. Missiles continued to influence political decisions. By 2026, exchanges involving Israel, Iran, and regional actors still risked reigniting wider conflict. Fresh missile launches and retaliatory threats repeatedly tested the durability of ceasefire arrangements. Military planners on all sides remained cautious. Diplomats continued negotiations. The war had entered a new phase. The answer depends on perspective. Israel demonstrated its ability to strike deep inside Iran. The United States demonstrated its willingness to use force against Iranian nuclear facilities. Iran showed that it could retaliate directly with missiles and drones. Yet none of the major questions were fully resolved. Iran's future nuclear capabilities remained a subject of international debate. Regional tensions remained high. Negotiations continued, and the possibility of renewed fighting never disappeared. In many ways, the conflict ended without a clear winner, but it changed the strategic landscape of the Middle East. 100 days after the first strikes, the Middle East looked very different. The shadow war between Israel and Iran had become an open conflict. The United States had entered the fight directly. Missiles crossed borders, nuclear facilities became targets, global markets reacted, and millions watched nervously as the region moved closer to a wider war. Whether historians ultimately describe these events as a brief conflict, the beginning of a longer struggle, or a turning point in Middle Eastern history remains to be seen. But one thing is clear. The first 100 days of the Iran-Israel-US war reshaped regional security and reminded the world how quickly long-standing tensions can erupt into open conflict. If you enjoyed this documentary, subscribe for more in-depth coverage of military history, geopolitics, intelligence operations, and the conflicts shaping our world.